Kris, if you'd be kind to share with us some thoughts today.
Sure. Do I do it up there? Yeah. Okay. All right. There you go. Okay. So, first of all, how's it going? I'm Kris Arca. I teach philosophy at Miami College. I'd like to give a quick thanks to Dr. Claus for inviting me here. This is I guess this is my third time speaking in front of all of you. So thanks for being here and for listening. I want to talk to you about forgiveness, but what I want to say first is a little bit about phenomenological hermeneutics. But actually, what I'm going to tell you about it is something that you're probably already familiar with being Unitarians. So a quick little history lesson. Phenomenological hermeneutics emerged out of a philosophy known as existentialism. Existentialism happened around the 1800s. A philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard and another one named Friedrich Nietzsche are considered to be the founding fathers of it. Existentialism can have the sort of stereotype of being a very pessimistic philosophy because one of the starting points of the existentialists is that there is no fixed or objective purpose or meaning to existence as such, including our human existence, right? And so our fundamental struggle with the meaning of our lives is also this sort of creative moment where whatever it is that we say is the meaning of life is really something that we're making up on the spot, right? Then you have hermeneutics kind of arising out of this. And one thing that the hermeneutic philosopher would say is, it's not that there is no meaning to existence, it's actually that there's a little too much meaning to existence, right? And just as an example, right, you're sitting in this room and notice everything that you see is an object in front of you, right? Well, except for the people, they're not objects, right? But everything else that you see is an object in front of you that has an overwhelming amount of meaning, right? This table can mean whatever it is that your imagination can tell you, right? This table is something that you can use to put stuff on. It's something that you can use to sit on. It's something that can be used as a barricade, right? Same thing with the chairs, right? Everything around you has more meaning than one fixed iota of meaning, right? There's these multiple ways in which you can take existence and the objects of existence. And one thing that is a really big presupposition in hermeneutics is the idea that existence is so meaningful that we would actually be doing a disservice to existence by trying to reduce it purely in scientific causal terms, right? So if you were to say, I don't know, describe the interaction between two people and just try to talk about it purely in scientific terms, purely in terms of chemistry and electricity, you would have a very accurate description of what's going on, right? Some sort of stimulus A is causing neurons at B, C, and D to fire and release this sort of chemical in the brain that causes the organism to say this, which causes organism B to have neurons trigger and fire, right? And in these regions of the brain, you'd have a very accurate description of what's going on, but you would lose something in that description. And one thing that hermeneutics would say is to fully understand existence, to fully understand human existence, you also have to, and this is the part that you already know, right? You would also have to employ metaphorical language, analogy, poetry, right? So whenever you use a metaphor to understand something, right? If you were to describe the body as being a temple, all right, that's not a factual description, right? Someone that's, say, a biologist would say, well, what do you mean? This is just, right, tissue. These are dead skin cells, and all of it is made out of different cells, and then ultimately it becomes, right, subatomic particles, right, so on and so forth, right? But if you describe the body as a temple, using this metaphor, you would understand what it means to care for one's own body and to relate to the body of others more than just talking about things in terms of pure description. Same thing if you talk about, say, a relationship with people, say a romantic or a loving relationship, if you were to talk about it as being something like a garden, right? A good relationship is like a garden. Well, factually, it's not really a garden, right? There's no soil, there's no plants, there's no, there's no seeds, right? There's none of this. And yet, it adds to our understanding of the sort of care that we should bring into these sorts of relationships, right? And the way in which these relationships need to be nurtured, and the way these relationships need attention and care, right? This adds to our understanding of existence. It doesn't take away from our understanding of existence, right? In the same way that you might describe school as a prison, right? Again, right? Not really, but this is a metaphor, right? That helps add to our existence. And so one thing that hermeneutic philosophy really tries to do is it tries to create a space wherein which we pay attention to the metaphors that we use in order to describe the situations that we are in. Because chances are, those metaphors tell us more about the situation that we are in, right? Whatever situation that might be. I'm using the term loosely to describe any sort of, right, existential moment that you might be in your life, right? Whether it's at a moment of searching, a moment of despair, a moment of hope, of optimism, of strength, right? Wherever it is that you find yourself, it's important to pay attention to the metaphors that you are using to better understand your situation, because that's going to say something about how you are comporting yourself to your existence. Here's a metaphor, right? You can think of us as, say, a tuning fork, right? You can think of the metaphors you use as a tuning fork, right? And when you hit a tuning fork, right, it creates a certain sound, right? At a certain note, a certain tone, and that tone kind of reverberates, and it shows you how you yourself are tuning yourself to your existence, how you yourself are relating to your existence, right? That's what these metaphors do. And so now, that's leading me to, say, the main topic, which is supposed to be on forgiveness. The last time I was here, Dr. Claus encouraged me to, right, have something that is more participatory. So here's something that is in the spirit of that. I'd like you to take some time, maybe partner up with someone, and just, you don't have to think about a time where you have been forgiven of something, or a time where you have offered someone else forgiveness, right? Think about a time. You don't have to say what it is that you were forgiven of, or what it is that you forgave the other person of, but maybe take just, just 2-3 minutes, talk to someone, and just think about what sort of metaphor you might use to describe that moment of forgiveness, right? How do you understand that moment of forgiveness? What metaphor do you use? What did that moment of forgiveness feel like?
Give an example of a metaphor.
Okay, so, I mean, an analogy, so I'll start with an analogy, then I'll say a metaphor, right? So, an analogy is whenever you say something like, X is like Y, where X and Y don't seem to have anything in common, right? So if I were to say, philosophers are to arguments as Batman is to batarangs. What? Batman uses batarangs any moment that he's in. Anytime he's in trouble, he reaches into his utility belt and he has a Batman. He has a batarang for every moment, right? Regular batarangs, batarangs that explode, batarangs that shoot out smoke, right? So on and so forth, right? Philosophers use arguments in order to, whatever situation they are in, they have an argument for that situation. It's their main tool, right? That's an analogy, right? A metaphor is similar, right? A metaphor is when you describe X as being Y, when those two things are very different from each other, and yet there's an underlying creative, relationship that links the two together, right? So the body is a temple. Well, no, it's not really a temple, and yet, well, what do you do at a temple? Well, you show respect, you take great care for that temple, right? If you live in that temple, you wake up every morning, you tend to it, you make sure that the temple is running well, so on and so forth, right? And well, what sort of relationship should we have with our body? Oh, well, perhaps that level of respect is something that we should have with our own body. That level of care is something that we should have with our own body or our embodied being, right? So on and so forth, right? This sort of broadens our understanding of something. So, like I said, maybe take some time. Think about a moment where in which you offered an apology to someone, or where in which you accepted the apology of someone, where you have forgiven someone, right? Go back to that moment and just think about what sort of metaphors you might use to better understand that moment. Take some, 3 minutes, right? Nothing big.
You want us to pair up? How do you
Yeah, pair up. Yeah, 2 or 3. Just just think about. I just want to know what sort of. How do you understand that moment of forgiveness? Don't be shy.
Maria, Sam is not that. Bring Sam over.
When we're talking about this moment of forgiveness, we're also talking about, and especially the way I phrased the question, right? I had you revisit a moment where either you were forgiven or you gave someone forgiveness, right? This is a moment of vulnerability, right? This is a moment where you might have to reconcile with a mistake that you made in your past that you might feel still, right? Might still resonate with you. Right? Or with a mistake that someone else made in the past that you forgave them, but even still, right? There could have this strong emotional resonance, right? Like, that tuning fork again, right? It really resonates still. And I don't want to get too lost in what I was going to say, but what I'd like to say now is, would anyone like to share something that they heard about forgiveness that you think rings true to what the essence of forgiveness is? You don't have to give any details about your own personal life, just, well, one thing we talked about was forgiveness is kind of like...
Well, it's warmth.
Okay, all right, can you say more, right? What is it about that's warm?
It
what does that
was
mean?
warmth that grew and enveloped. And it felt good.
What do you think? So, is it that when you are forgiven, or when someone forgives, when you are forgiven, or you forgive someone, where is the source of warmth coming from?
Well, from the heart.
Okay.
From the heart.
Okay.
And the heart was actually jagged and broken.
Okay.
The image of the heart.
Okay.
Maybe like a big red Valentine heart.
Yeah.
Jagged and broken.
Right.
And then it came together and it was whole.
Okay. All right. So forgiveness is a moment where one can become whole again, or a relationship can become whole again, right? And it seems like that what you're talking about with the heart means that forgiveness also requires an element of love as well. Or if not that, compassion and understanding, right? Which understanding seems to be, right, a form of compassion, right?
Yes.
To understand someone or understand where someone's coming from seems to mean that you are capable of having compassion towards them. That's great. Anyone else? Yeah.
Freeing oneself.
Yeah, okay. Can you say more? This is actually something I was going to say later.
It has nothing to do with the other person or action. It's, for me, totally freeing, and a decision is made spiritually and physically to be rid of whatever it was that caused you to forgive yourself.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, this seems to be a really important relationship that we tend to be forgetful of, right? Whenever we talk about relationships, it's usually we talk about it in terms of one person relating to another person. but it seems like there is always a relationship that we have with ourselves as well. And we can experience ourselves as if we were another, right? I can think back to the person I was in my early 20s, and sure, there's a lot of continuity that I have with that person, but there's a lot of discontinuity too. I'm a very different person in my 30s than I was in my 20s.
Or 18.
And yet, yeah, or in my teen years, or even when I was a child. And yet, at the same time, right, this is an important relationship that we have with our own past. And one thing I would like to invite you to think about is, how do you interpret your past? And what metaphors do you use to talk about your past? And what other metaphors can you use instead? Because oftentimes our relationship with our own past gets sucked into a sort of gravitational field of some sort of narrative that we have about ourselves. And sometimes those narratives can be very uplifting, right? I've always understood myself as being a very courageous person, right? But sometimes those narratives can hold us back, right? And they keep us trapped or keep us boxed into one interpretation as to who it is that we are versus another. And one thing you might do in your life, as you are in the process of living it, is you might start to reflect back on your past and think, what other ways can I spin this story? And what other relationships can come out of this new interpretation of my life story? All right, so a moment of defeat or a moment where you feel that you might be at your lowest low can also be a moment where you see, wait a second, right? I was at my lowest and yet I was able to respond and come back, right? So a past regret could turn into an opportunity to improve upon yourself, right? Any more metaphors for forgiveness? Who are you?
Well, we talked about how being forgiven kind of requires you to walk in somebody else's shoes,
right,
in order to kind of understand and learn and be able to, improve yourself in the future.
All right, so again, we have this understanding of compassion and understanding emerging, right? So to say to someone, I am so sorry, is to admit to them that you had taken their perspective for granted, but now you see what it might have been like to be on their side, and you see how that could have felt, or that indeed actually felt, and you regret it, and you wish you didn't do it, and you'd like to take the action back, or at least you'd like to be able to move past the action. Am I understanding correctly? Yeah. What I would like to add to this is something that a hermeneutic philosopher, a guy named Paul Ricoeur, said about forgiveness. It's very similar to what Carol said, right, about liberation. When you forgive someone, or when someone forgives you, what's happening metaphorically, and perhaps then also more deeply, is the person who is doing the forgiving is willing to say to the other, I am breaking you free from the chains of cause and effect that led you to that action. I am not identifying you with that action. I see you as something more than, other than that action, and the root causes that led up to this. I see you as something else. I see you as someone that is free from that. I see you as more than that. And there are a lot of different metaphors you can use, right? There's the overwhelming love, right? Warmth. To forgive someone is to, right, have this warmth towards them that kind of melts away any sort of icy or I'm thinking of a lyric, right? Here's a lyric. Cold silence has a tendency to atrophy any sense of compassion. right? So it's from a song called Schism by a band called Tool. It's a beautiful song. It's a song about a relationship that has fallen apart, right? And so, in any case, right, the sort of the warmth that can come from reconnecting with a friend, reconnecting with someone that was important to you, can kind of melt whatever cold silence there was that was keeping the two of you apart. You might think of forgiveness as some form of cleansing, right? You are washing away your sins. You are washing away the things that might cause you regret. But I'm going to stick with the liberation theme, because there's something really hopeful about forgiveness. When you forgive someone, when someone forgives you, they are freeing you from those past actions. They are freeing you from those past deeds. You are being freed from those mistakes. And what's being said is that you are not the same as those things. You are always something more than those things, something else than those things. And there's an element of hope here whenever we give someone forgiveness. And that element is that every person has the capacity to change. And every person has the capacity to change. And every person has, no matter where you are in your life, your past does not necessarily need to be that which defines you. You can break free from that and be the sort of person you know that you already are. And so this might be the spirit of forgiveness, the willingness to see that the other person is more than what they have done, is more than what they might think they are. They can always overcome that sort of, those sort of experiences. That's all I really wanted to say. It's good to forgive people. It's good to be forgiven. That's all.
Thank you.
All right.